Welcome to Revenge by Eve. Sit back, relax, and let's dive in.
I sat across from my parents' lawyer as he explained that the $200,000 my grandfather left me had been given to my stepbrother, and my parents thought I'd never find out. Before this story goes any further, tell me, would you have forgiven them or done what I did? And as you listen, comment where you're listening from. I read every one. My grandfather's name was Thomas Warren, and he was the kind of man who believed in building something that lasted. He started with nothing. Literally nothing. He grew up during the Depression, dropped out of school at 14 to work, and spent the next 60 years building a small construction company into something successful. Not wealthy by billionaire standards, but comfortable. Secure. The kind of success that came from decades of hard work and smart decisions. I was his first grandchild, and from the day I was born we had a connection that everyone in the family recognized. He'd hold me for hours, tell me stories about building his first house with his own hands, teach me about measurements and materials before I could even write my name. Every Saturday from the time I was 5 until I graduated high school, I spent the day with him. We'd go to his workshop where he'd teach me carpentry, or we'd drive around looking at buildings he'd worked on, or we'd just sit on his porch and talk about everything and nothing. "You've got the mind for this," he'd tell me, watching as I carefully measured a piece of wood. Not just the construction part, the building part, the creating something from nothing part. My parents thought it was sweet, this relationship I had with my grandfather. My mother, his daughter, would smile when she saw us together, though there was sometimes something complicated in that smile that I didn't understand when I was young. My father was supportive too, in his distant way. He was an accountant, methodical and reserved, and he seemed content to let me spend time with my grandfather while he focused on his work. I was an only child for the first 12 years of my life. I had my parents' attention, my grandfather's devotion, and a childhood that felt stable and safe. When I was 10, my grandfather sat me down and had a serious conversation with me. "Eve, I want you to know something," he said. "I'm setting money aside for you, for your future, for college, for starting your own business someday, for whatever you need to build the life you want. You don't have to do that." "Or, Grandpa?" "I know I don't have to. I want to. You're going to do something special, and I want to make sure you have the resources to do it." He'd established a trust fund in my name. I didn't know the exact amount, I was 10, but I knew it was substantial. He'd worked his entire life for it, and he wanted me to have it when I turned 25, or when I graduated college, whichever came first. "This is between you and me," he said. "Your parents know about it, but I want you to know directly from me. This is yours, no matter what." I hugged him tight, not fully understanding what a gift he was giving me, but understanding that it meant something important. That money represented more than financial security. It represented his belief in me, his confidence that I would build something meaningful with my life. And for the next 15 years, that knowledge shaped how I approached everything. Things started to shift when I was 12. My father remarried. My mother had passed away 2 years earlier from cancer, and after a period of grief, my father met Diane. She was nice enough at first, warm, attentive, eager to build a relationship with me. She had a son from her previous marriage, Justin, who was 10. He was quiet, a little awkward, and I tried to be welcoming. We were becoming a blended family, and I wanted it to work. My grandfather was cautious about the remarriage. I remember him pulling me aside after meeting Diane for the first time. "How do you feel about all this?" he asked. "I think it's good," I said, trying to convince myself as much as him. "Dad seems happy. Diane's nice. Justin's okay." He studied my face. You know that no matter what changes in your family, what I set aside for you doesn't change. That's yours. Understand?" I nodded, though I didn't understand why he felt the need to emphasize it. The first year with Diane and Justin was an adjustment, but it was manageable. We moved into a bigger house to accommodate everyone. I got a stepbrother, Diane got involved in planning family activities, and my father seemed lighter than he'd been since my mother died. But small things started to bother me. Diane would forget to include me in family photos sometimes, positioning herself with my father and Justin in ways that edged me out. When I pointed it out once, she laughed and said, "Oh, honey, I didn't even realize, we'll take another one." But we never did. She'd make Justin's favourite meals and ask me to be flexible about dinner preferences. She'd buy him new clothes and games while suggesting I didn't need new things because I already had so much. My father didn't notice, or he didn't want to notice. I spent more time at my grandfather's during this period. His house became my refuge, the place where I felt seen and valued. "How are things at home?" he'd ask, and I'd shrug and say fine because I didn't want to worry him. But he knew. He always knew. "Remember what I told you," he'd say. "What's yours is yours. No one can take that away from you." The warning signs became harder to ignore as I got older. When I was 15, I wanted to take an advanced architecture course at a community college over the summer. It was expensive, $800, but it was exactly the kind of program that aligned with my interests and my grandfather's encouragement to pursue building and design. I asked my father if he could help with the cost. He sat me down at the kitchen table with a serious expression. "Eve, I need you to understand something. Money is tight right now with the new house, and supporting 4 people instead of 2. I can't just spend $800 on a summer course." "But you spent $1,000 on Justin's baseball camp last month." His face hardened. "That's different. Justin needs that for his development. You already have so many opportunities." "I'm asking for one opportunity." "The answer is no. I'm sorry, but you need to learn that we can't always get what we want." I went to my grandfather. I didn't ask him for money, I just told him about the conversation. The next day, he paid for the course himself. When my father found out, he was angry. Not at my grandfather, but at me. "You went behind my back," he said. "I didn't go behind your back. I was upset, and I talked to Grandpa. He offered to help." "You manipulated him." "I didn't manipulate anyone." But the narrative had been set. I was the manipulative daughter who played my grandfather against my parents. Diane reinforced this narrative at every opportunity. She'd mentioned to relatives how I was difficult and always playing favourites between my father and grandfather. She painted me as spoiled, entitled, ungrateful. Justin, meanwhile, could do no wrong. He was praised for every minor achievement, defended for every mistake, given every benefit of the doubt, and I watched my father transform into someone I didn't recognise. The man who'd once supported my dreams and believed in me became someone who constantly criticised, who compared me unfavourably to Justin, who seemed almost relieved to have a reason to be disappointed in me. My grandfather saw it all, and it enraged him. "Your father is making a mistake," he told me when I was 17. "He's letting that woman poison his relationship with you." "Maybe I am difficult," I said quietly. "You're not difficult. You're independent. You have opinions. You don't just fall in line. Those are strengths, not weaknesses." He pulled out a folder and showed me documents, updates to his trust, confirmations that everything was still in place for me. "When I'm gone, this is yours. No one else's. I've made it ironclad. Your father is the executor, but he can't touch this money. It goes directly to you when you turn 25 or graduate college. Grandpa, don't talk about when you're gone. I'm 78, sweetheart. We need to talk about it, and I need you to know that I see what's happening. I see how they're treating you. This money is my way of making sure you have the freedom to build your own life away from all this." I hugged him, crying into his shoulder, feeling the weight of being seen and valued by the one person who truly understood me. My grandfather died 2 weeks before my 18th birthday. Heart attack. Sudden, massive, no warning. He was working in his garden 1 minute and gone the next. I was devastated in a way I'd never experienced before. He'd been my anchor, my advocate, the person who believed in me when no one else did. And the funeral was large, He'd been well known in the community. I sat in the front row between my father and Diane, numb with grief, barely hearing the eulogies. After the service, his lawyer, a man named Robert Hendricks, approached me privately. "Eve, your grandfather left very specific instructions about his estate. I'll be in touch in the next few weeks to discuss the trust fund he established for you." My father overheard. His expression flickered with something I couldn't quite read. "We'll handle all of that together," he said smoothly. "As her father and the executor of the estate." Robert looked uncomfortable but nodded. "Of course. I'll be in contact." The next few weeks were a blur of grief and graduation preparations. I was finishing high school, trying to process the loss of my grandfather, trying to figure out what came next. I'd been accepted to a good university with a partial scholarship. I planned to study architecture, to honour my grandfather's encouragement and my own dreams. The trust fund would cover the rest of tuition and living expenses, give me the freedom to focus on school without working 3 jobs. A month after the funeral, my father called me into his office. "We need to talk about your grandfather's estate," he said. I sat down expecting a conversation about logistics, about when the money would be transferred, about the details of the trust. Instead, my father slid a paper across the desk. "There's been a complication," he said. I picked up the paper. It was a letter from Robert Hendricks, brief and formal, stating that the trust fund previously designated for me had been restructured according to the wishes of the executor to better serve the needs of the family. I read it 3 times, trying to understand. "What does this mean?" My father wouldn't meet my eyes. "It means the money your grandfather left is being divided equally between you and Justin." The room tilted. "What? No. Grandpa left that money specifically for me. He told me. He showed me the documents. He left it to the family, and I'm the executor, which means I have discretion over how it's distributed. You can't do that. He set up a trust. It was legally designated. And as executor, I have the authority to make adjustments that serve the best interests of all my children." All my children. Justin had been my stepbrother for 6 years, and suddenly he was entitled to money my grandfather had spent decades setting aside specifically for me. "Justin isn't even his grandchild," I said, my voice shaking. "He's part of this family, and it's not fair for you to get everything while he gets nothing." "It's not about fair. It's about what Grandpa wanted." "Your grandfather wasn't thinking clearly in his later years. He was old, and he had favourites, and that's not healthy. I'm correcting an imbalance." I stood up, the paper crumpling in my hand. "You can't do this. It's already done, Eve. I'll fight this. I'll get my own lawyer. With what money? You're 18, you have no resources, and any lawyer will tell you that the executor has broad authority. I've consulted with Robert, and this is completely legal." I stared at my father. This man I'd loved and trusted my entire life, and I didn't recognize him. "Diane put you up to this. This is my decision. Does she even know how much money we're talking about? Did you tell her you were stealing from me to give to her son?" His face reddened. "I'm not stealing anything, I'm being fair. Fair would be honouring what Grandpa actually wanted. Your grandfather spoiled you. He gave you an inflated sense of entitlement. This is a lesson in humility." I left his office, went to my room, and called Robert Hendricks myself. Robert was sympathetic but firm. "I understand this is difficult, Eve, but your father is correct. As executor, he has significant authority over the distribution of assets. The trust was structured in a way that gave him discretion, which your grandfather likely did because he trusted your father to honour his wishes. But he's not honouring them. He's giving half my inheritance to someone who isn't even related to my grandfather. I understand, but legally there's very little you can do unless you can prove that your father is acting in bad faith or misusing his position. He is acting in bad faith. You'd need to prove that in court, which would require resources you don't have and time you can't afford if you want to start university in the fall. I felt trapped. Completely, utterly trapped. "How much are we talking about?" I asked. Robert hesitated. The trust was valued at approximately $215,000. $215,000. My grandfather's life savings, everything he'd worked for. Hung cut in half to give to a kid he'd never intended to benefit. What's my father planning to do with Justin's half? I believe he's setting it aside for Justin's college fund and future expenses. So Justin, who'd been in my life for 6 years and had no relationship with my grandfather, was getting $100,000 of money that was meant for me. Money my grandfather had explicitly, repeatedly told me was mine. "There has to be something I can do," I whispered. "I'm sorry, Eve. I truly am. Your grandfather would be devastated by this, but without resources for a legal battle, your options are very limited." I hung up and sat in silence in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by all the things my grandfather had given me over the years. Books on architecture, tools he'd taught me to use, photos of us together. And I realized that my father had stolen more than money. He'd stolen my grandfather's legacy. He'd stolen the future my grandfather had carefully planned for me. That was the moment I stopped waiting for them to change. I didn't scream. I didn't confront them again. I simply started planning. I had 3 months until university started. 3 months to figure out how to survive without the financial support I'd been counting on. I took every shift I could get at the restaurant where I'd been working part-time. I applied for additional scholarships, financial aid, student loans. I looked for cheaper housing options, budgeted down to the last dollar. And I started documenting everything. Every conversation with my father about the inheritance. Every email from Robert Hendricks. Every statement my grandfather had made about his intentions, which I wrote down from memory in painstaking detail. I also started digging into my father's finances. I didn't have direct access, but I had something else. I'd been helping him with basic bookkeeping and filing for years. He'd taught me about household finances, shown me where he kept important documents, trusted me to handle things when he was busy. That trust had been a mistake. I found records of exactly how the trust fund was being distributed. My half was being held in a restricted account that I couldn't access until I graduated college or turned 25. Justin's half was being transferred directly into an account managed by my father and Diane. No restrictions, no conditions, just $100,000 they could use however they wanted. I found other things too. Diane had significant credit card debt that had been paid off shortly after my grandfather died. My father had made a down payment on a new car. Justin's half of the inheritance wasn't being saved for his college. It was being spent. They'd stolen from me to improve their own lives. I made copies of everything: bank statements, credit card bills, emails between my father and Diane discussing how to use the money. I organized it all into files, both physical and digital, and stored them somewhere safe. Then I waited. I started university that fall with a combination of loans, scholarships, and the money I'd saved from working. It wasn't easy. I lived in a tiny studio apartment, worked 20 hours a week, and took a full course load. But I was free. Free from my father's house, from Diane's subtle cruelty, from watching Justin benefit from money that should have been mine. My father called occasionally, perfunctory conversations where he asked how school was going, and I gave brief, neutral answers. I never mentioned the inheritance. I never gave him the satisfaction of knowing how much he'd hurt me. Justin started community college that same year, living at home, his tuition fully paid for by what remained of his half of the trust. I graduated in 4 years with honours. I'd worked myself to exhaustion, but I'd done it. I had my degree in architecture, my grandfather's dream for me, realised despite everything. And the day after graduation, I became eligible to access my half of the trust fund. I went to the bank with all my documentation, ready to claim what was left of my grandfather's gift to me. The account manager looked confused when I asked about the trust. "I'm sorry, but this account shows a balance of $800. My heart stopped. "That's impossible. There should be over $100,000. She scrolled through the transaction history, her frown deepening. There have been multiple withdrawals over the past 4 years, all authorized by the account's co-signer. Who's the co-signer? She checked the paperwork. A Mr. David Warren. Is that your father? My father had stolen it all. Not just Justin's half, which he was legally entitled to distribute. My half too. The half that was supposed to be restricted, untouchable mine. I sat in that bank staring at the transaction history, and I felt something inside me crystallize into pure, cold clarity. He'd taken everything my grandfather had left me and gambled that I'd never fight back. He was wrong. I went straight to a lawyer, not just any lawyer, a firm that specialized in estate fraud and fiduciary misconduct. The consultation was free, and I brought every piece of documentation I'd gathered over the past 4 years. Bank statements, emails, the original trust documents Robert Hendricks had provided, proof that my father had misrepresented the terms of the trust. The lawyer, a sharp woman in her 50s named Patricia Moss, reviewed everything with growing interest. Your father breached his fiduciary duty as executor, she said. He commingled funds, used trust assets for personal benefit, and violated the explicit terms of the trust your grandfather established. Can I get the money back? You can sue for restitution of the full amount, plus damages for emotional distress and punitive damages for breach of fiduciary duty. This is a strong case. I don't have money for legal fees, she smiled. We'll take this on contingency. We don't get paid unless you win. And given the evidence you've compiled, I'm very confident you'll win. We filed suit 3 days later. The lawsuit named my father as defendant, detailed every violation, and demanded full restitution of the $215,000, plus interest, plus damages. I had the complaint delivered to his office at work. I wanted him to be humiliated the way he'd humiliated me. His first response was denial. He called me, furious, accusing me of being vindictive and ungrateful. I'm your father. How dare you sue me? You stole from me, I said calmly. You violated a trust. You betrayed everything Grandpa wanted. I did what was best for this family. You did what was best for yourself and Diane. You spent my inheritance on a car and credit card bills. You have no proof of that. Actually, I have 4 years' worth of proof. Bank statements, emails, transaction records, everything. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy. Eve, please, we can work this out. You don't need to destroy our family over money. You destroyed our family the day you decided your new wife's son was more important than honoring your own father's wishes. I'll fight this. You won't win. We'll see. He hired a lawyer, expensive one. Which was ironic considering he'd used my inheritance to pay for it. His defense was that he'd acted within his authority as executor, that the trust terms were ambiguous, that he'd made good faith decisions in the best interest of all parties. My lawyer tore that defense apart. She presented the original trust documents, which explicitly stated the money was designated for me. She presented my grandfather's correspondence with Robert Hendricks, detailing his intentions. She presented testimony from people who'd heard my grandfather discuss his plans for my future. And then she presented the bank records showing that my father had spent trust funds on personal expenses that had nothing to do with my education or welfare. The judge was not sympathetic to my father. The trial took 6 months. 6 months of depositions, and of watching my father lie under oath, of seeing Diane's true nature exposed as emails were read aloud in court, emails where she called me a spoiled brat who didn't deserve special treatment, emails where she discussed ways to maximize what Justin gets from the old man's money, emails where she encouraged my father to use the trust funds for their own purposes because Eve will never know if we're smart about it. I sat in that courtroom and watched my father realize, piece by piece, that he'd lost. The final verdict came on a Tuesday afternoon. The judge ruled in my favor on every count. He ordered my father to repay the full $215,000, plus 6 years of compound interest, plus $50,000 in punitive damages for breach of fiduciary duty. Total, $310,000. My father went pale. He didn't have that kind of money. He'd spent it. The judge gave him 90 days to arrange payment. If he couldn't pay, liens would be placed on his assets, his house, his retirement accounts, everything. I walked out of that courtroom with my head high, and I didn't look back. The fallout was swift and devastating. My father had to take out a second mortgage on the house to raise the money. He had to liquidate his retirement accounts, paying penalties and taxes. Diane left him 3 months later when she realized the comfortable life she'd built was collapsing. Justin, who'd been silent throughout the entire process, reached out to me once. "I didn't know," he said. "I didn't know the money was supposed to be just yours. I thought it was meant for both of us. Did you think that when you were using it to pay for your car, your apartment, your trips?" My mom told me, "Your mom is a liar and a manipulator, and my father enabled her. You were a kid when this started, Justin, but you're not a kid anymore. You knew where that money came from." He didn't have an answer for that. I never spoke to him again. My extended family had mixed reactions. Some people thought I was right to fight for what was mine. Others thought I should have let it go, that suing my own father was cruel and vindictive. I didn't care what they thought. Robert Hendricks, my grandfather's lawyer, called me personally after the verdict. "Your grandfather would be so proud of you," he said. "He always said you were a fighter." Those words meant more to me than the money ever could. I used the settlement to pay off my student loans, invest in a secure portfolio, and start my own architectural design firm. My grandfather had dreamed of me building things, creating things, leaving a legacy. And that's exactly what I did. 5 years after the trial, my firm was thriving. I'd built a reputation for innovative, sustainable residential design. I had clients who respected my work and valued my vision. And I'd built it all without my father, without Diane, without anyone who'd tried to keep me small. I bought a house, a small, beautiful craftsman that I renovated myself, using the skills my grandfather had taught me. Every time I walked through the door, I thought of him, of his workshop, of his belief in me. The money he'd left me had done exactly what he'd intended. It had given me freedom. Not just financial freedom, but the freedom to build the life I wanted, on my own terms. My father tried to reconcile once. He showed up at my office 3 years after the trial, looking older and tired. He asked if we could talk. I agreed, mostly out of curiosity. We sat in a coffee shop, and he told me he was sorry, that he'd made mistakes, that Diane had influenced him in ways he regretted, that he missed me. I listened to all of it and I felt nothing. No anger, no forgiveness. Just a distant observation of a man who'd made his choices and was living with the consequences. "I accept your apology," I said, "but I don't want a relationship with you. Eve, I'm your father. You were my father. You stopped being my father when you decided money was more important than honoring your own father's wishes. When you stole from me. When you chose Diane and Justin over me. I made a mistake. You made a series of calculated decisions, and I'm making a decision too. I'm choosing not to have you in my life." I stood up, left money for my coffee, and walked out. I never saw him again. 10 years after my grandfather's death, I stood in front of a building I'd designed, a community centre in his name, funded partially by the settlement money and partially by donations from people who remembered him. The Thomas Warren Community Centre, a place where people could learn trades, develop skills, build things with their hands. It was exactly what he would have wanted. I thought about everything that had happened, the betrayal, the fight, the years of rebuilding, and I realized that my father's attempt to steal my inheritance had actually given me something unexpected. It had forced me to fight for myself, to advocate for what I deserved, to stop waiting for approval or permission and to build my own path. My grandfather had left me money, yes, but more importantly, he'd left me the belief that I was capable of creating something meaningful, and no one could ever take that away. If you were in my place, what would you have done differently? And don't forget to tell me, where are you listening from right now? This is Revenge by Eve, and your voice matters here.
Thanks for watching Revenge by Eve. We hope you enjoyed the story. See you soon.